Opening airstrikes. The February 2026 opening airstrikes were coordinated attacks by Israel and the United States targeting Iranian military infrastructure. In late February 2026, a series of coordinated airstrikes were launched against sites identified as military and nuclear-related within Iran. The operations were planned over months, relying on satellite intelligence, intercepted communications, and prior surveillance. Targets included air defense systems, missile storage facilities, and command centers. The strikes were presented as precise. In practice, precision depended on assumptions about who was present, what was stored, and how structures would respond to impact. Several sites were located near populated areas, a known condition that had been accepted during planning. What happened was immediate and difficult to reverse. Explosions spread beyond intended targets. Secondary detonations occurred where munitions were stored. Civilian casualties were reported within hours. What went wrong was not a single miscalculation, but a layered decision. To proceed despite proximity to civilian zones, to rely on incomplete intelligence, and to assume containment of damage. The consequences extended beyond the initial strikes. Casualty numbers rose over the following days, as injured individuals lacked access to functioning hospitals. Infrastructure damage delayed emergency response. The event set the tone for escalation, establishing that the threshold for large-scale strikes had already been crossed. Tehran Strike. The Tehran residential strike was an air attack that hit a densely populated neighborhood during early retaliation exchanges. Within days of the initial operations, a strike targeted what was believed to be a mid-level command location in Tehran. The structure had previously been associated with military logistics. By the time of the strike, occupancy patterns had changed. The attack occurred at night. Residential buildings surrounding the target absorbed significant blast impact. Windows shattered across multiple blocks. Structural damage caused partial collapses in adjacent apartments. What happened was not immediately clear to those inside. Many victims were not at the center of the blast, but in nearby units affected by debris, pressure waves, and subsequent fires. Why it happened reflects a reliance on outdated or static intelligence. The designation of the target did not fully account for current civilian presence. The timing, intended to reduce visibility, instead increased the likelihood of residents being indoors. What went wrong was the assumption that a known location retained its original function. No real-time verification altered the decision. What another? The consequences were measured in individual cases. Families separated under collapsed structures, delayed rescue due to ongoing risk, and a casualty count that included individuals with no connection to the intended target. The event became one of several cited in discussions about urban targeting and the limits of precision warfare. Missile barrage. The missile retaliation on northern Israel was a barrage launched by Iranian forces and allied groups targeting urban areas. Following the initial strikes, retaliation came in the form of coordinated missile launches toward northern Israel. The systems used included ballistic missiles and drones, some intercepted, others not. Air defense systems engaged immediately. Interceptions occurred mid-air, but debris fell unpredictably. A portion of incoming missiles penetrated defenses, impacting residential zones and infrastructure. What happened unfolded over minutes. Warning systems activated, civilians moved toward shelters, and impacts followed in quick succession. Not all individuals reached protected areas in time. Why it happened was strategic, designed to demonstrate capability and impose cost. Targets were selected for visibility and disruption, rather than strict military value. What went wrong involved both offensive and defensive limitations. Missile accuracy varied. Interception success was high, but not absolute. The margin of failure, even if small, translated into direct impact on populated areas. The consequences included fatalities, injuries, and structural damage. Some deaths occurred, not from direct hits, but from secondary effects, falling debris, shockwaves, and accidents during evacuation. The event reinforced a pattern. Defense systems reduce damage, but do not eliminate it. Nuclear facility strike. The Isfahan nuclear facility strike was a targeted attack on a strategic site that resulted in unintended civilian exposure. The facility near Isfahan had long been identified as part of Iran's nuclear program. In early March 2026, it became a priority target. The strike was designed to disable infrastructure without triggering large-scale environmental fallout. Precision-guided munitions were used, aimed at specific sections believed to house critical components. What happened did not follow the intended containment. The impact damaged containment systems, and while no full-scale nuclear detonation occurred, there were reports of localized contamination. Workers on site and residents in nearby areas were exposed to hazardous materials. Why it happened reflects a calculated risk. Planners assumed structural resilience would limit secondary effects. They also relied on modeling that did not fully account for real-time conditions inside the facility. What went wrong was the gap between simulation and reality. Internal configurations differed from intelligence assessments. Safety systems failed under stress. The consequences extended quietly. Immediate deaths were limited, but exposure led to longer-term health effects. Evacuations were partial and delayed. Medical infrastructure was not prepared for this type of incident. The event introduced a different category of casualty, those who would not be counted immediately. Naval incident. The Strait of Hormuz naval incident was a confrontation that escalated into lethal exchanges, affecting both military personnel and civilians. In mid-March 2026, tensions extended into the Strait of Hormuz, a critical global shipping route. Naval vessels from multiple nations operated in close proximity. A series of warnings, misinterpretations, and rapid maneuvers led to an exchange of fire. What happened unfolded in a compressed timeline. A vessel identified a perceived threat and responded. Nearby ships reacted in sequence. Within minutes, multiple vessels were engaged. Why it happened was rooted in ambiguity. Identification systems were strained, and communication channels were limited. Each side operated under the assumption of imminent risk. What went wrong was not a single trigger, but a chain reaction. Rules of engagement allowed rapid response, but left little room for verification. Civilian vessels in the area were caught between military positions. The consequences included the sinking of at least one vessel and casualties among both military crews and civilian sailors. Disruption to shipping followed, affecting fuel transport and regional economies. The deaths were not confined to combatants. They extended to those operating within a space that had become contested without warning. Damascus Strike. The Damascus proxy strike was an attack on Iranian-linked personnel in Syria that resulted in collateral civilian deaths. Iranian military advisors and affiliated groups had maintained a presence in Syria for years. In March 2026, a strike targeted a building in Damascus believed to house senior personnel. The location was within a mixed-use district. What happened was a direct hit on the structure. The building collapsed partially, and surrounding areas sustained damage. Civilian residents in adjacent apartments were affected immediately. Why it happened reflects the strategy of targeting leadership outside national borders. The assumption was that removing key figures would disrupt coordination. What went wrong involved the environment of the target. The building was not isolated, civilian presence was constant, and evacuation was not feasible within the time frame. The consequences were immediate and visible. Casualties included both intended targets and uninvolved residents. The strike also expanded the geographic scope of the conflict, drawing attention to the use of proxy environments, where boundaries between military and civilian spaces are less defined. Power grid collapse. The Khuzestan power grid collapse was a cascading infrastructure failure following repeated strikes on energy facilities in southwestern Iran. Khuzestan province contained a concentration of power plants, transmission hubs, and fuel depots. Over several days, in March 2026, multiple sites were struck or disrupted. None of the individual attacks fully disabled the grid. The failure emerged cumulatively. What happened was gradual. Substations went offline, load shifted unpredictably, and protective systems began to trip. Within hours, large sections of the province lost electricity. Hospitals switched to backup generators. Water treatment systems slowed or stopped. Why it happened reflects a strategy aimed at degrading operational capacity rather than destroying a single target. The grid's interdependence meant that partial damage could propagate across the system. What went wrong was the absence of redundancy under sustained pressure. Backup systems were not designed for simultaneous, multi-point disruption. Repair crews faced delays due to ongoing risk and damaged transport routes. The consequences were not immediate explosions, but delayed fatalities. Patients reliant on powered medical equipment were affected. Heat exposure increased without climate control. Access to clean water declined. The deaths were dispersed, recorded over days, and often attributed to secondary causes rather than the initiating event. Industrial Zone Strike. The Haifa Industrial Zone Strike was a missile impact on a chemical storage area that resulted in toxic release and civilian casualties. The industrial zone near Haifa included facilities storing chemicals for manufacturing and energy processing. During a wave of retaliatory strikes, a missile struck within the perimeter of one such site. What happened was a contained explosion followed by the release of hazardous substances into the surrounding area. Emergency services responded, but the nature of the materials required specialized containment. Why it happened reflects target selection focused on economic and industrial disruption. The presence of hazardous materials increased the potential impact without requiring precise targeting of individuals. What went wrong involved both protection and preparedness. Storage facilities were not fully hardened against direct strikes. Civil defense measures were insufficient for rapid large-scale exposure. The consequences extended beyond the initial blast. Air quality deteriorated in nearby neighborhoods. Evacuations were partial and uneven. Casualties included workers on site and residents exposed to toxic fumes. Some effects were immediate, others emerged over time as exposure-related conditions developed.